Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Today we're going to be looking at the Autodesk BIM 360 products, and I'll introduce our presenter here in just a moment. My name is Wendy Finch and I am the Marketing Director for Topcon Solutions Stores. And today we are presenting on Autodesk with our Pacific Northwest stores PPI Group as an Autodesk Gold Partner. So a couple of housekeeping items first. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website within a couple of days of the recording. The other thing is we will be taking some questions at the end as time permits. So within your menu bar, there is a questions tab, and so feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar and we will address them at the end. And if we don't get to your question, we'll definitely reach out to you one-on-one with an appropriate representative to make sure that we address any questions or interests or concerns that you have. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and at this time, I want to introduce Blake Douglas from Autodesk. And Blake, I'm going to kind of let you just give your own bio. You know it probably better than I. And let our attendees know what your role is there at Autodesk, and then we can dive into the presentation. So welcome, Blake.
Sounds great. Thanks, Wendy. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Again, my name is Blake Douglas. I am a technical specialist here at Autodesk with a primary focus in our BIM 360 product offering. I've been with Autodesk now for a little over 2 years, solely focused on BIM 360, interacting with customers to help drive the development cycle with the team that's actually building the tools so that we make the best solution for you. Prior to coming on with Autodesk, I spent an extensive amount of time in the field as a project manager / estimator / business development. You know how it is, wearing multiple hats for various projects. Today we're going to talk about BIM 360 as a whole. In general, we'll discuss the modules that sit inside of BIM 360, how everything ultimately ties together, and then we'll dive into specific workflows. Again, we'll take any questions here towards the end. We'll also follow up as needed if there's some things that we don't quite have the answer to, or we don't necessarily get to all of the questions. We'll make sure that everything gets taken care of. So I've got one slide that I want to share with you. I don't want to bore you with PowerPoint, but I think it is important to understand where we are coming from and the direction ultimately that Autodesk is headed. So Autodesk, through AutoCAD and Revit, owns that design space. So I want to say it's upwards of 90% of projects built today utilize AutoCAD or Revit from a design perspective. About 8 or 9 years ago then, Autodesk saw the opportunity to start to transition more into the construction phase of projects. How do we basically take all of this really great information that's built out in that design phase and move it into the execution phases so that we're not seeing that loss in data? That's where Autodesk made a couple of acquisitions of other software tools that were already existing. One was Horizontal Glue. Many of you may know it as BIM 360 Glue today. And the other was Vela Systems Field. Many of you might know it as BIM 360 Field today. With those tools already being created, there was a lot of customization that we had to do to get to them to tie to one another, both between BIM 360 Glue and BIM 360 Field, and also back to those design tools in Revit or Navisworks. So they were more or less, they were siloed offerings. They were really great for running clash detection in that pre-construction phase for BIM 360 Glue, or a lot of configuration in the form of what we could do within the tool out in the field for BIM 360 Field, but they were more or less their own standalone products. that's when Autodesk had this initiative, this idea called Forge. Forge down there in the orange is the foundation of the entire why behind today's presentation. So Autodesk Forge is our way of opening up our software via APIs to allow for third-party development. What that ultimately means is that we are working in conjunction with other software makers to allow for two-way integration between our BIM 360 offering and between their tools. So think about ERP systems, for example. We are never going to get into the ERP space. There's a number of tools that are already existing today that do that very, very well. But we know that oftentimes we're going to have to tie into those tools or vice versa. They're going to need to gather information from the BIM 360 offering. So Forge allows us to work in conjunction with them, building those integrations, many of which are ready off the shelf today through the apps.autodesk.com website. We also have our partner organizations, such as PPI, that are working on the Autodesk Forge network to build out some custom integrations for their customer base. Through those various APIs that they're building, they have the ability to do things that BIM 360 right out of the box wasn't built to do. We also have a number of customers that are on the Autodesk Forge network building their own integrations, maybe to existing software that they've built in-house, or utilizing Forge to add on to the functionality of BIM 360 so it fits their specific needs and workflows. The idea here ultimately is project data there in the center. That's the core of why we're doing this. We want to have the ability to exchange that project data through different software tools, but also as we move along the phases of our project. So rather than moving historically like we used to from the design phase and flattening out some of that data-rich information into PDFs, then trying to rebuild back up from there, oftentimes we saw this data drop-off as we move from one phase to the next. Here now with this central repository of information, project data spans the entire life cycle of the project with very little to no drop-off as we transition from design phase to pre-construction to field execution and ultimately handover and operations. What this is all lending itself towards and where Autodesk is really, really looking to the future is around analytics and insight. Think about things like machine learning or artificial intelligence, where we can now look at this project data holistically across our entire business unit and identify things from a predictive standpoint in terms of what we might want to think about come the next project. So understanding things like our schedule or our budget and how those were affected based on past performance and what we might expect on an upcoming project. So BIM 360 is built with all of these different things in mind. The backbone of BIM 360 being a product called BIM 360 Document Management, or Docs. We'll dive into Docs here first because that's where everything starts and kind of finishes. It's really that portion of BIM 360 that spans the entire project lifecycle from design to completion. Then we'll dive into the other tools that focus on these four phases of our construction project. So in design, we have BIM 360 Design. Oddly enough, the names kind of line up there. So with BIM 360 Design, we're going to look at the collaboration around a Revit environment and how that interacts with Docs as that central model is hosted in the cloud. Then we'll move into BIM 360 Glue, looking at gluing those models together, running clash detection against them. Then we'll transition over to BIM 360 Build, actually building the building, and identify things like our RFIs, our submittals, as well as all of our various checklists that we can build out. Then if we have time, we can quickly touch on BIM 360 Ops, the portion of the BIM 360 family that's really built around ticketing and maintenance of a building. So now let's transition over to BIM 360 Docs. Here, this is where everything is going to start and end on our project. BIM 360 Docs is built on what Autodesk calls a low trust environment. So there's an expectation that we're going to have a number of external stakeholders involved in the project co-located here within one central area for project information. What that means is that the entire tool is built on our permissions. So we can look at permissions based on individual user or groups of user based on their company or the role that they play on this project. So when I log in, I'm only getting access to the projects that I've either created or I've been invited to, and I'm only going to see the folder structure that I'm granted access to. So for example, if we are housing our contracts here in this contract folder, and we don't necessarily want anyone outside of our organization to see these, we simply don't grant them access to it, and their folder structure in this case would go from civil to correspondence. They wouldn't even see that that contract folder exists. We can set up this folder hierarchy and all the permissions on a project-by-project basis. We can set up templates. We can really do it however we see fit for our project. If we have an instance where we need certain users that are outside of our organization to have access to contract, we can easily add them later down the road. Within BIM 360 Docs, there are two key areas. There's the project files and the plan section. Let's start with the project files. So the project files is an area that's going to be just that central repository of information. So think about any other cloud storage solution like Box, Dropbox, Google Drive. This is going to be a replication in essence of that same functionality. But beyond that, we get into specifics around design and construction workflows. Here we can host over 50 file formats that are natively supported for viewing directly within the tool. So if we want to view a Revit model, for example, we can simply select that Revit model and it's going to view it right through our browser without having to have a seat of Revit. This is all rendering live in the cloud. We can now navigate this model. We can circumvent it, go around it. We can add sections, and we can do a number of different views that we'll touch on here shortly. So we support viewing of those Revit files, DWG, DWF, AutoCAD files, PDFs, all the way out to products like SketchUp files or Microsoft Office files in the form of Word, PowerPoint, Excel. So now a user out on the field has the ability to access that same information that we're seeing in the office environment. Project files is also the location where our central model is going to reside when we're working inside of a BIM 360 design project. So if we are co-collaborating on a central model, this is where that model will sit, and we'll touch on the folder structure and how we interact with one another in that case. We also have our plan section then, and you'll notice here that we've got this Autodesk Place Architectural Revit file here, and when we click on it, it was going to take us directly to that 3D model. In the case where we go into our plan section, however, you'll notice that it's the exact same Revit model, and now we are getting all of the various sheet views separated out individually for us. the system does this automatically. So no longer do we have to generate a PDF set every single time the model updates. We now have the ability to simply update the model in the plan section. Then all of those external stakeholders that, again, might not be Revit users have the ability to view specific sheets associated with that Revit model without having a license of Revit and without us having to create the PDF set. We also do this same sheet extraction with a PDF file. So in this case, you'll notice that it was all one PDF file. It had multiple pages within it. And here, the system has automatically extracted all of those for us, automatically naming them based on the title block information, and ultimately controlling the version history off of that naming convention as well. So if this file name changes, I know there are many projects where we would try to standardize and we would put V1, V2, but inevitably someone would come in and put version 3, or they would add underscore and the date, or they would add their name, and it would throw off the entire sorting and searchability of that file. Here, we don't worry about that. We actually look to the content that's on the document itself. Everything is tracked here as well in terms of who updated that project or that file most recently and when they did so. Everything that we're doing here today is directly within our browser. In this case, I'm utilizing Google Chrome. You can use Internet Explorer, Firefox, Safari for those Mac users. We also have native applications built for both iOS devices and Android devices. And that's functioning on both the tablets and the phones. The look and feel are going to be very, very similar. The user interface is supposed to be seamless in terms of I'm going to pick it up on my phone or I'm going to pick it up on my browser through my computer, and they're going to feel the same. I'm not going to have to relearn exactly how to do everything. Main differences here are that the comparison functionality that we'll jump into in a second inside of document management isn't quite there yet on our mobile devices. You'll see what I mean. It's more of a heavy process that we haven't quite nimbled down for the mobile applications. But the mobile application has one function that we don't have here in the browser, in that with our browser, just like any other web address, if we want to access the system, we have to have internet access. However, when we're utilizing our mobile devices, we have the ability to work in an offline mode, essentially creating a cache version of specific project documents or the entire project. We can choose. Then when we go out onto a job site, we can perform all of these different functions in the form of viewing the model, viewing any of these sheets or the PDFs, creating markups or issues on top of them, and then when we get back onto a connected environment, it's going to resync all of that through the cloud. So here, let's jump into one of our sheets. I'm going to select this first floor plan simply because over here, from our identifiers, I can see that there's a lot going on here. We've got 6 markups, we've got 8 issues. There's some things that we need to work on this first floor plan here. So I'm going to hide some of those things initially in our markups and our issues. And let's talk about what it looks like when you first load in the model, or a PDF. The same thing will happen when we load in a PDF. The first thing that will happen is you'll notice these section callouts have hyperlinks associated with them. So as I hover above them, we can see a thumbnail view that pops up, and I can select and navigate directly to that section callout. I can continue to grab these and navigate further from where I started. I remember when I was in the field, oftentimes I'd be trying to understand what was going on in a project, getting the full context, and I would have one sheet between my pinky finger and my ring finger and another sheet between my ring finger and my middle finger, and before you know it, I've got this fistful of paper that I'm trying to flip back and forth, trying to understand what's going on in my project. Here we have that breadcrumb trail, if you will, where we can easily navigate back to any of those documents that we looked at. In this case, I'll select where we started. The other thing to note as well is that when we are in here and we're looking at some of these that don't have section callout hyperlinks, we're not just looking for this shape with maybe some letters and numbers in it. We're actually looking for that content within the project. So if it's not part of our published settings within Revit, we aren't going to create a hyperlink. So you'll notice as I go back here that A301 doesn't exist in this folder structure, so it's not going to link to nothing essentially. It's also smart enough to know that it's not going to link to itself. The next thing that I want to cover is our markups. I'm going to hide our issues here. You'll notice that we've got a couple of markups on this document. And I can see in our markups pane here on the left who created them, when they created them, and what version they created them on. As I select these, it's going to bring that markup front and center in focus for me. One thing to note is that these markups are created as secondary layers over the top of our documents. What that allows us to do is, as we create new versions, we're not just going to overwrite this markup. We're not going to get rid of it simply because there's a new version. Maybe that new version doesn't address this markup. So this markup will flow through to subsequent versions until we actively go in and say that this markup has in fact been taken care of, and we would go ahead and archive it. When we archive a markup, it's visible on the on the document that it was created on, as well as any document it was ever created on or ever active on. We have the ability through our filter to go back and see any archived markups. You'll notice here now that we've got a number of other ones that we didn't initially see. We also have the ability to add attachments to our markups, and these can be in the form of documents that reside inside BIM 360 docs, or it can be in the form of photos taken right out there in the field, having the ability to snap a photo on the spot or select from a group of photos that we've already taken. When creating a markup, the markup functionality is fairly basic, and that's by design. We imagine a user out in the field on a phone using their finger to create a markup, essentially just looking to convey information from the field back to the office. In that case, they could come in here, they could very easily create a cloud, add some text, arrows, highlighting, whatever the case may be. By default, our markups are in a private mode. So if I'm out on the job site or I'm going through my own little design review, I leave it in private if it only pertains to me. But in the case where I need it to be viewable by everyone associated with the project that would have access to that document, I simply hit publish it, and then it becomes a part of the active set. We also have the ability to create issues on top of our drawings, and our issues are going to come in the form of these circular push pins. You'll notice here that we actually put this one right here inside of this markup. We can see all of our issues over here on the left. When creating an issue, we simply drop where our push pin is going to be located, add a title, a description, a location, and a due date. Say I need it done by Thursday. Switch the month because we're going into August here. I want it done by Thursday. I can type in a location, but the key piece is our assignment. Here we can assign this issue to a specific user, or again, just like our permissions, to groups of users based on their role or the company that they're associated with on this project. When I create this, it's going to send an email notification to that user or groups of users with all of the pertinent information. It's going to have a hyperlink there, and when they click that hyperlink, it's going to navigate them to the view that we're in right now. So it'll bring that specific issue front and center again, focusing us to the correct information, and it's going to have all of the pertinent details associated with that issue. Just like our markups, we have the ability to add attachments. We can drag and drop files right from our computer, browse to them if they sit within our BIM 360 Docs project, as well as the ability to have an activity thread where we can track everything that's happening on our issue. So if it's reassigned, if the status changes, or if we just want to comment back and forth, we can easily do that. One thing to note about our issues is that only the user that is assigned an issue has the ability to answer it. I have kind of full administrative privileges in this project, but on a real project, I would only have the ability to answer this if I am assigned it. Then the process would be for the user that created that issue to go in, view the official response from that answer, and determine whether or not that has in fact been completed, and then go in and close it out. So it's more or less a checks and balances process. I can't tell you how many subs I've had on projects that would love to just go in and close out every single one of their issues and say, oh yeah, they're off my table now. No need to worry about it. Here, only specific users can, again, do and see what they have access to. The beauty of utilizing the Revit model information when we're looking at our sheet views, we can do the same markups, these same issues on our PDFs, but now when we're utilizing our Revit model information, all of this is selectable. All of these walls, all of these pieces of furniture, all of this is selectable, and we can pull the property information off of these objects. So again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, in the form of moving data from the design phase over to the construction phase, this really translates well. We can see that this is a chair, this is a particular door, we can see the color, the dimensions. All of this information as it's built out in our model will now translate over to the field. We have the ability to measure. Again, the beauty of utilizing our Revit information is that the scaling is already set. We already know that information, so we can easily see that. If I want to see this in feet and fractional inches, there we go. We can create those markups and those issues, again, in PDFs as well as directly within our models. If I want to see a markup in my model, I can select that markup and it's going to take me directly to the view that it was created in. I also have the ability to compare our models. So I'm going to compare version 3 of this model and version 2. We can compare any versions that are ever inside BIM 360. For what it's worth, I should mention this, BIM 360 Docs has unlimited data storage. Let me repeat that. We have unlimited data storage. That's unheard of in the industry, unheard of in a cloud platform. We, again, focus here is on project data. Load in as much information as you can fit into the project, put it in here, and host it here forever. So let's compare between those versions. When we do this, it's going to create a change report for us. It's going to show us what has been added, what has been removed, and what has been modified between version 2 and version 3. Again, you'll notice that this is a little bit heavier, so we're not quite there yet on the mobile platform. I can further filter this down by discipline or modification type. So if I turn these off, you'll notice that I'm only looking at shape changes. Now we've got 5 of them. As I select an object, we can see the differences between these versions here, selecting back and forth. Or when I select from the filter tree here, you'll notice it might be difficult to see the change. It's shortened up a little bit, but by how much? Here it actually gives us that quantity. It's shortened by just over a foot. We also have the ability to simultaneously view our 3-dimensional document with our 2-dimensional sheet views, and they're tied 1-to-1. So if I go and navigate to a specific sheet, I can then come in and select that same door that I was looking at, and it's going to show that to me in the model. Or if I want to look through my model browser and I maybe want to identify all of my single flush doors, now it's going to highlight them all for me in the model, and it's going to show me all single flush doors here in blue on our sheet view. So really cool 1-to-1 tie between our contractual documents that we're often used to seeing on project sites with that model. This is kind of that stepping stone into a BIM-enabled workflow. Now, that's BIM 360 Docs in a nutshell. We do have the ability to look at all of our issues from our document management side. We could filter this down by specific user, the status if need be, apply that. We can export this information from a PDF or a CSV, as well as creating an issue directly from this location. Now let's touch on BIM 360 design. So our project is going to start inside of document management because that's where our central model is going to be located. Now what does design mean to our project? So BIM 360 design is that cloud work sharing that is now more controlled. So through those permissions, we're setting exactly how we're going to interact with those teams. Here I'm inside of Revit. Now we have this collaborate tab opened up, and everything is still managed through our work sets, just like we would if we were working off of a server-based workflow. It almost functions no differently. The idea here is that we're pushing to the cloud and pulling down changes from the cloud, all based on a cache version. So we're only moving those changes. We're not having to upload and download the entire model every single time. We also have the ability here to determine exactly what is going to be published in that plan section inside of document management. So we determine which sets are active. It can be 3D views, it can be sheets. If I turn this one off, for example, and I save and close, now when I publish this model to the docs environment inside of plans, we will only see set 2 and set 3. So all of those sheets associated with set 2 and the ground floor sets associated with sheet 3, we won't have those 3D views there. Within BIM 360, we have a folder structure that's set up for our various project teams. In this case, we've got the architectural team, the civil team, the mechanical team, structural team. All of them are going to have their own folder. So if I'm a part of the architectural team, this is where my central model is going to sit. If I'm a part of one of those other teams and the permissions are set up accordingly, I can link directly to this model so that every time the architectural team is in Revit and they synchronize with Central, they hit this synchronize button, we're going to see an updated version through our link immediately. The second way that we have to link to these documents is through this shared folder. So if I'm a part of the architectural team and I don't want them linking every single time we hit synchronize, I want to be in charge of when we're actively going to share this out with those other teams. I simply don't grant them access to my architectural folder, but then they'll have access to this shared architectural folder. In this case, this model will sit here. They can link to that. So every time we actively go in and say, we definitively want to share at this point, at this point, at this point, down the project timescale, we can do that. And then the last way that we can interact is through a consumption model. So if I'm a part of the structural team, for example, and the architectural team has shared that model with me, I don't necessarily want to link to that model every single time they share. I want to go in, actively review what that new share encompasses, what some of those changes are, and determine exactly when I want to link to that shared model. And in that case, that's called a consumption or consumed. Here, we can review that shared file and we can determine we want to consume it. We've got that architectural consumed folder, and here's where that model sits. All of that is managed through our design collaboration module. So within design collaboration, I'm going to build out our swim lanes here, and I'm going to switch to our structural team for our example purposes. So in this case, these circles are all points at which packages were created along a project timeline. We can see here that the ones that are fully filled in are created and consumed. Ones that are fully circled but not colored in are shared but not consumed yet. In the case of this one down here, we've created this package and we've created a package over here, but we haven't shared this out with the other project teams. Creating a package is very simple from this location. We can create it, and we can select all of the different pieces of information that we want from our project. So we could have just the model, we could have specific sets, sheets, and 3D views. Go ahead and delete that one because we didn't put anything in it. In the case of looking at consumed information, we can see exactly what is inside that package by exploring it. We can see that we've got a 75% CD set here. We can go into specific 3D views, into specific sheets. We can see all of those different views. So in the case where we want to look at one of those 3D views, we can see that. We also have the ability to visualize those changes. So it's going to be that same change report that we saw inside of BIM 360 Docs. In this case, there are no changes to the model. Again, if I wanted to, I can come into that architectural package that was shared out to me. If I choose to consume this, it'll automatically put it in that consumed folder under that team for me. So again, just gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we want to operate with those various project teams. Moving along then to BIM 360 Glue. BIM 360 Glue is going to run our clash detection for us against our various models as they sit inside of BIM 360 Docs. So through model coordination, we can determine exactly which models we want to sit in here. And through our clash report, it's going to automatically run this every single time that model is updated. Here we can see if we want to look at our MEP against our structural model, we've got 365 clashes. All of these clashes are automatically grouped for us. This is going to load our clashes in then and load both of those models simultaneously. We can then select our clashes and see exactly what is happening. So if I want to see a pipe, for example, we can see this pipe and identify those clashes over here in the model. Or if I wanted to see, say, a rectangular duct, I can select that and we can see that it's going through some of those structural floors and our cutouts aren't in perfect alignment. Moving on then, for the sake of time, let's touch on some of the other modules. BIM 360 Build encompasses both project management and field management. Inside of project management, this is where we're going to host our RFIs and our submittals. The RFIs list here will look and feel very similar to our issues. Same thing with our ability to filter them, export them, create them directly from here. But one thing that you'll notice is when I'm inside of this and I'm going to assign this to specific users, you'll notice that I can only assign it to Neil or Alyssa in this case. That's set up on a project-by-project basis in terms of the workflow that we want the RFIs to follow. So rather than being able to send it to anyone and everyone on a project, it's going to go to very specific individuals on our project. We do have the ability to add co-reviewers, so they might be users that are going to be involved in the process. They're going to add additional attachments or be involved in the activity, commenting back and forth. But it's still up to Neil, in this case, to progress this RFI along in terms of its status. We also have a distribution list that we don't have with our issues, where it may be an RFI that affects a broader scope, but in this RFI, Frank isn't going to be able to contribute to the RFI. He's not going to add attachments or activity. He's just going to be aware of this RFI happening in the background. Same thing as our issues, where we can add attachments, we can drag and drop, we can browse to our locations within Docs, as well as an activity thread to track the statuses, as well as our mentions. So if I want to mention a specific user, David Sanchez, keep an eye on this. he can now receive a notification and know that he needs to keep an eye on this RFI. We also have our submittal package within BIM 360 Project Management. Here we have our specification sections and then our items within those spec sections, and our groups of items make up packages. You'll notice here that we have approval responses for some of these. We have a number of different categories for our responses, so we can reject them, revise and resubmit with notes. We can put in anything that we want for individual items as well as entire packages. So there's a full approval process for this. Obviously in here, we want to put in any specific details, approval, any cut sheets, any pieces of information we see that we need, we can put it. So in this case, this is just documentation. This could be product data. This could be different certifications, whatever the case may be. Again, this is where all of our attachments will be managed for review and for official response, and then that activity thread, as well as being able to come in here and adjust the statuses. Moving along then to our field management module. Field management is built with those users out on the job site in mind, having to go through their checklist, their punch list, their safety walks, and going through each individual item saying yes, no, or filling in additional content. Here we can come into a specific issue, or a specific checklist rather. We can say that, yep, this wall is finished, but maybe there are a couple of dents, 3 dents. Oh, we've got 3 of them here. And we could take a photo if needed. So see photos. Then out on the job site, we could snap a photo. We're going to complete this. We're going to complete that checklist. Now that is done, that's off of our books. In this case, it was assigned to Kara. Whenever there is a non-conforming checklist item, so something that has happened that is a no, we're automatically going to create a field issue for it. In this case, it was field issue number 36. We can select this. The issues here differ slightly from our document issues in that there's a type and there is a root cause. These pieces of metadata are going to be very important when we start to look more into the analytics and insight. Again, attached a photo with a markup on top of it. We also have all of our field issues here. We can see who created them, when they created them, where they're located. Again, same abilities to filter all of this down. In addition to those tools inside of field management, we have our daily logs where we can grab our weather information. We can put in our labor associated with this project for each individual company, as well as any notes about the progress of today's project. So with that, Wendy, I know we're coming down here to the end of our webinar. Any questions that have popped up that we might be able to answer here in the last couple of minutes?
Yes, Blake. First of all, thank you for the presentation and a great demonstration of this platform. We do have a few questions. Before we get to that and allow those still on the call to submit additional questions, I'm going to go ahead and take the presentation back just so we can put up our contact information. There we go. And sorry about this. I've got the questions just went into micro. Okay, so I opened up the questions. Hopefully that's not showing on the display, and it's just showing our contact information. So we've got our websites and our toll-free number up there. So if there's any questions that you have after we get off the line here, please feel free to reach out to us. So a couple of questions is, in order for consultants and clients to access this, do they also have to have a license of the BIM 360 docs?
So there's two ways that a project team can be interacting with one another. With a BIM 360 design where we are co-collaborating on a project, we have the ability to allow the external stakeholders, whether it's consultants or whomever, the ability to bring their own license. So they can purchase their own and bring them to your project. Or we also have a number of customers that are purchasing all of the seats for their project, and they are giving them out to the users that need them. But yes, anyone that needs access to the system would need a license in some form or fashion, whether they bring their own or whether they're purchased for the entire project. One thing to note is that the licenses are fluid, so that you can assign them to a user based on an email address, and when they're maybe no longer a part of the project, so the project's closed out, you can very easily remove them from the project. That seat then goes back into your pool of seats that you can give out. One other thing to note as well is that the seats are unlimited data storage again and unlimited projects. So whether a user's on one project or 100 projects, they're still only taking up one seat.
Excellent. Excellent information. Thank you. Next question is, this participant says, does this integration with GIS? I know ArcGIS Pro can now read the RVT directly. Also, for doc management, can we integrate or link BIM 360 docs with Esri's ArcGIS Enterprise?
Yeah, not today. We are actively working on both GIS information and Esri integrations into BIM 360 docs. Last year at Autodesk University, we announced a large partnership with Esri. Stay tuned. That's about as much detail as I can go into, but we're working on a lot of things in the background to support more civil-based workflows inside of the BIM 360 platform.
Okay, great news. Great news. This question came in at about the 10 or 12-minute mark within your presentation, so I only give you that as a point of context because the question is brief. It says, can you upload a folder structure?
We cannot upload a folder structure. Right now, the way the system is set up is essentially you would create a folder structure on your first project. From there, then, you can replicate that same folder structure on any projects you create in the future.
Okay, great. One additional question here is, in the presentation you briefly talked about fields that are populated by uploaded files. Can we create custom fields and or columns and have them populate from something like a templated title block?
We can from our PDFs when we are talking about pulling information off of the document itself. We can do that with the PDFs. With our Revit files and with our DWGs or DWFs, we don't have the ability just yet to pull some of that custom information. However, we can add those custom attribute fields. It's just more of a manual process to fill that information out rather than automatically extracting it. So yes, from a PDF perspective, not quite yet with our DWGs, DWFs, or RVT files. Okay.
And one last question here so far, unless something comes in here in the next minute. Let's see. You showed us how to create issues on the drawing. Can we create issues not associated with the drawings? He gives an example here. If we have an issue with something not modeled but received the wrong spec sheet, could we create an issue without a drawing and associate a new spec sheet?
Yep, absolutely. You can create an issue that isn't associated with any document whatsoever. So the only difference there, you'd have all that same content, all that same information, just not a push pin on a document. Or you can drop one of those push pins on any form of document that sits in Docs. So it's not strictly associated with the sheet views or the model. It could be on a Word document. It could be on a PowerPoint, an Excel file, a SketchUp model. Any of those supported file formats that we can natively view, we can create an issue directly on those. So for a spec sheet, you could, if that was in a PDF format, you could easily drop a push pin there, or you could simply reference that entire document if you want to in that issue without dropping a push pin, simply by creating that from the issues list.
Okay, very good. One last question did come in. Scott, I'm gonna take that one offline, and I'm gonna have a rep contact you directly to answer that. That's an Autodesk question, but we'll take that offline. And then Chris says, how are locations populated in Docs? Is it just the Revit levels and rooms, or is it customizable?
Right now within Docs, it's entirely customizable, so it's all more or less manual entry. We're working on building out specific locations from both the model information as well as a project level setup within the BIM 360 environment, completely aside from a model. So if we're working entirely in a PDF, we could set up locations based on that PDF information. Again, stay tuned as we continue to develop a lot of these functions.
Okay, and then Chris is also asking, can we view point clouds on the doc platform?
We cannot. So that is a result of what we call the large model viewer. That's how we view all of the information inside of BIM 360 right now. The large model viewer was actually created before Recap, and now with Autodesk Recap, we are working on building out a second version of the large model viewer to handle things like point clouds with a lot of data behind them. That tends to be the biggest thing, is making it efficient enough for viewing directly in the cloud, especially when we consider the mobile devices.
Okay, great. And our final question, I think probably I can answer, actually, which is rare when a question comes through that I can answer. So we're being asked, how can an individual firm or organization get a live presentation for their own team? So while we appreciate Blake being on the call and doing this presentation from Autodesk, I believe you're in Denver. Is that right, Blake?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so fortunately, the PPI Group, who's affiliated with Topcon Solutions Stores, has their own BIM team here. So we can set up and schedule an independent and custom presentation or demonstration for any firm, and do that whether we do that on site or we can do it remotely. So just having a call, finding out what your challenges are, what you're looking for, learning a little bit more about your business, and then our BIM team will go to work and put a presentation together that will meet your needs. So that's where that contact information here on your screen comes in. The 800 number or either of our websites will get you directed to the right person. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for everybody attending today's webinar. And Blake, special thanks to you for taking time out of your busy schedule and showing this platform to us. We very much appreciate it and hope to have you as a guest speaker, a guest presenter on another webinar. And until then, we're going to go ahead and sign off, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks, everybody.